Hey, I'm going to try to quickly, because of timing with the videos, try to answer your questions with the food security and the conflict in the Kivu. And this is just off the top of my head, nothing scripted or planned. Most people in the region, especially in Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, see with M23 or the 40 other major rebel groups as not stemming from food insecurity, but that the lack of food is an outcome of what is the underlying problem, which is lack of governance in the DRC, lack of a government that really is trying to represent the interests of their people. Instead, they are just representing the interests of special individuals, special groups over the general interest of the community. President Joseph Kabila, like his father, Mike Mobutu, are juggling a lot of people's desires, like individuals who are making millions off of the mineral wealth of the Congo, and especially in the mineral theft. And that is not to say that there are Rwandans, Ugandans, Burundis, Zimbabweans, Angolans, French, Belgians, Americans, British, and etc., who also are benefiting from the lack of governance, lack of respect to private property, and the ability for corruption in the government. But I do not believe whatsoever, especially the claim by the UN group of experts, that Rwanda is coordinating, that the government necessarily is coordinating with M23 or with these rebel groups. And what most people see, and this is why I tend to agree, people who are not in New York City, 16,000 kilometers away, is that the governance, the lack of respect to private property, the lack of interest of individuals being really represented, all individuals, it's not a handful of millionaires and entrepreneurs and government bureaucrats, that is creating an environment that rebel groups could just spawn. The rebel groups that are representing the interests of either their ethnic or their villages, their ethnic group of villages, or etc. And having these rebel groups is causing food problems. Specifically, that people who are now in the military, in these rebel groups, are no longer in the fields and planting and harvesting crops for food. But in the equation of looking at correlation, because in the end we'll never be able to get causation when we're dealing with human beings, or at least that's my opinion, it isn't that food insecurity is leading to instability, lack of governance, that is leading to the military, the lack of a competent military, and the M23 or other rebel groups, FDLR or any of them. It is the lack of governance, in my opinion, that's what's stemming it all. Because when there's no economic development, when you have nothing to really kind of live for, then you're going to listen to people who are promising that they'll be able to feed your family and etc., etc., even though they can and they don't even have any desires to. Now, when it comes to the current conflict, most of the blame, and I agree with this, goes not to Rwanda, as the UN group of experts want us to believe in their report, which, to be honest, if I wrote a report and submitted it with sources that cannot be named, cannot be verified, I would fail the report. If I did my graduate thesis that way, or my dissertation, it would be thrown right in my face, but because this is the UN, it's allowed. I have many other problems with the report, but I'm doing my investigation for the Partnership of Research and International Affairs and Development on this coordination between the Rwandan military, because I have close friends in it, and even people who are indicted in the report are friends of mine and people who I've met to M23. But to get back, M23 is a new rebel group which is an evolved form of RCD, that rebel group that was created by Rwanda, let's be honest, during the Second Congolese War. And on March 23rd, 2009, the peace agreement that promised that the rebel group would be brought into the Congolese military. There'll be the stop of FDLR. Those are the former genocideers of the Rwandan genocide. And a few other agreements that were made between Joseph Kabila, President Kabila, and the rebel group. They were basically not honored because of Kabila's side. Now, there were some problems by who would eventually become the leaders of M23. But overall, this is lack of governance and lack of the government actually carrying out their responsibilities to the people, especially when Congolese Hutu extremists are starting to massacre Congolese Tutsis in what I would call even a genocide. But once again, I'm in the Kigali Memorial Center right now. Near me is the bodies of 285,000 people that the UN didn't give two damns about in 1994. So that brings a whole other issue of why is the UN pointing the finger at Rwanda. In my belief, it stems down to simple racism, that Paul Kagame is an ethnic Tutsi even though he's the president of Rwanda, and M23 is majority Congolese Tutsis. They're Tutsis, so there must be connection, racism. Also, with over $1 billion being spent a year in the Congo, with 19,000 UN troops, and just nothing to really show for it, because governance can't be imposed from the top down. It can't be the U.S., the UN, especially when they're 16,000 kilometers away, telling people or telling a handful of leaders, this is what you need to do. Governance has to come from the population. Accountability of politicians has to be of the populations, not to the United Nations, that big Vatican on 43rd, 44th Street. And that's a very complex answer to solve. It's how do we create governance, how do we create accountability, and how do we make sure the people are represented? That's to come from the people themselves. And the UN, this is not going to be liked or loved. The UN wants simple answers. Maybe we have that from the West or whatever it is, but the UN, that's what they want. And blaming Rwanda or Uganda or any outside force for this new rebel group, ignoring the fact there are 40 other major rebel groups, in the Congo, it's just simple answers. And they want to feel relevant, And remember, just like before, I'm in Rwanda. The UN abandoned the country in 1994, and even though they want to talk so much about how they want peace and how much they want to stop genocides, etc., they don't. But this is a huge spiel. So a lot of people in the region see that food security, the lack thereof really, is an after effect from the conflicts, from the continual conflicts that started in 1994 with Hutu extremists who carried out the genocide and bystanders as well, fleeing to the Congo, Zaire at the time. Now, to try to answer quickly about economic relationship between the DRC and Rwanda, there seems to be two major groups in the Rwandan government that I've discovered, or that I believe, and I could be wrong, this is just from my experiences. The first is the military, who I have some close relationship with, which I have high respect, which they want peace with the DRC, but they're there to protect Rwanda. And if the Congolese ever got their act together and invaded Rwanda, it would only take them 2.5 hours to get to the capital. It's a small country. It's like Switzerland, Maryland, whatever the size that you want. It's very small. So as long as there's FDLR terrorist groups and other groups who are continually, at this point it's really just FDLR, wanting to continue the genocide of 1994, who will never recognize the current government. The Rwandan military is going to have safety first. And they don't care about international law because of what I said before. When they asked for the UN to help to stop the genocide, the UN was nowhere to be found. And even afterwards with the refugee problem in Zaire, the UN did not care. It was the simple answers versus the complex, which, whatever. Then you have the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. This is the other school of thought which wants economic trade. And that peace will come through that because Congo, it's either 70 or 80 million people, whatever, something like that. Those are consumer based that could be used for Rwandan businessmen, for traders. And relatively free trade is mutual benefit. There's mutual benefits to both groups, the producers and the sellers. And they want to create freer trade zone. There's no such thing as a free trade zone, but freer trade zone like they have in the East African community with Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, exactly, Burundi, and soon to be South Sudan, but we're going to determine, but it's going to be North Sudan. I think that's going to determine more than anything like that. In the southwest corner of Rwanda, there's a free trade zone that's been created for Congolese and Rwanda businessmen that they are not affected by tariffs, quotas, or any taxes, which is doing well, but it's relatively small. And let's be honest, security will always triumph over economic interests. So that's how a lot of Rwandans, I would even say Congolese, see it. That when they get a government that actually represents their interests, the Congolese, then they'll be able to really negotiate with Rwanda, negotiate with these rebel groups, and try to bring the amount down from 40, bloody 40, to hopefully none. But it's very complex how to do that. And there's just too many special interests who don't want it, who want the chaos because of the mineral wealth, mineral theft, that there are individuals from all, in my opinion, nationalities in this region who are part of. I don't believe there's the coordination with the government, Rwandan government, and what's happening, the mineral theft right there. What in the DRC, I have been to the Congolese desk in the Ministry of Defense of Rwanda, and this is an intelligence desk. But once again, this is 10 years after the Second Congo War, so it might have changed, whatever. And I'm open with my biases. And I believe that's it. If I missed anything, oh yeah, quick. Refugees, Congolese refugees who have fled to Rwanda and Burundi, they have been, I'm going to give just the Rwanda side because I know that firsthand. The Rwandan government has been able to take care of them, has been able to provide the food. The whole idea is for them to return. They are not Rwandans. They are Congolese. And it's up to their government to represent their interests and take care of them. It's not Rwanda's responsibility. You know, they have reached food security, like I mentioned in the last video, I believe. But yet, they're not at the stage, like the United States, that they can accept endless amounts of refugees, but I think it's near or close, whatever, to 50,000 or 100,000. They've been able to take care of them, been able to get them food, and it's not causing a strain on the food that's already available in Rwanda in the markets. But yet, so once again, to cap off, it's very confusing. This whole region is very confusing, and that's why I love this so much. Food security is very important in understanding the conflict, but I think that's more of an after effect, but that's my personal belief, of the core of the problem, which is lack of governance and lack of political leaders that care, and to give credit where credit's due. Joseph Kabila is in a terrible position. He has to make sure he doesn't get assassinated and make sure he makes some money on the side of all this, but trying to make sure he doesn't piss off too many special interests. Because there's a lot of power in with 40 different rebel groups. A lot of people want that presidency, want to be in control. So I hope I answered everything. If I didn't, just send me an email and I'll try to, in another video, answer them. I'm just going to go through the questions. So just once again, the food insecurity situation, there wasn't that much of a spillover in Rwanda per se. In Burundi a little bit, in Uganda a little bit. But it isn't so bad. Not saying that any of these countries outside Rwanda has any food security whatsoever, but it's not like with Darfur and Chad, with refugees fleeing to Chad and Chad not being able to support their own populations with food, which you find with Burundi a little bit more. So yeah, once again, if you need any more, please just ask.